And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News weekly show, podcast brought to you by the Livingston Parish News. We are here this morning with a councilman. I'm going to let him introduce himself here in just a second. But we had an interesting sort of situation come up at the council, had to deal a little bit with commerce. And I know he and I have talked about that in the past, but wanted to get him in here, sort of talk about what happened and what's going on with that situation. So, good morning, sir. I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Garry Talbert, Garry Frog Talbert. I'm Councilman District 2, representing the Watson and the northwest corner of the parish.
And so today we're going to be talking about Frenzies. It's a new, it's a Sexton novelty shop, but it doesn't quite meet sort of it does meet the restrictions in an antiquated ordinance, I guess you can say. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that, and what the council's trying to do to sort of resolve a situation. So first and foremost, the original ordinance that sort of governs over these things was passed in 2007. And as you and I have talked about before, it's a bit antiquated. And plus, there are some judgments at higher courts that would suggest that, might not necessarily be defensible in a court situation. So, what happened? These ladies applied for a permit and they were granted that permit. And then this came up afterward. So, take it from there. What happened from then? They got in contact with you, didn't they?
Yeah, they reached out. I mean, here's a situation. They applied for a commercial business operation, occupancy permit. It was granted. So technically, I mean, there was nothing wrong with that occurrence. If you look at our ordinance, if they sold certain products, technically they were going to be in violation of our obscenity laws. There was some idea to grant a variance. Councilman Wascom, who represents them, put an item on the agenda to grant a variance. And that's just a slippery slope. I mean, once in that particular situation, you grant somebody a variance, and we asked him in the meeting, what part do you want to waive? He was wanting to waive the whole ordinance. And my thought process to that was, if we waive the whole ordinance, then we open the door for anybody that ordinance regulates to go anywhere in the parish, and we have no control over what they do. In conversation with the parish attorney, a lot of those items in the ordinance wouldn't pass muster on the test that the Supreme Court's given down. There's like 3 questions you've got to ask. You've got to fail one of those questions, and what they were doing wasn't going to fail any of them. And a lot of the stuff that we address with respect to certain things, I mean, I think the ordinance kind of regulates some of the privacy of your own bedroom. And, that stuff just isn't, that stuff's not going to, pass muster in a court of law. So the idea, or my thought process was, and I talked to Councilman Wascom about it before the agenda came out, was to pull the waiver or the variance from the agenda, have an introduction to amend. The Home Rule Charter requires that when you do an introduction, you have some amendment to the ordinance in place, whatever you're intending to do. I said, we'll have something. I said, it won't be the final, ordinance we have, but we'll be able to make an introduction. We'll then be able to work on it at ordinance committee during the process between there and the next meeting. We'll have a public hearing. We can make amendments to what was introduced and then adopt it as amended, which would have made the process about 2 weeks. As it was, the ordinance committee, the agenda still read granting a variance and sending it to the ordinance committee to work out the problems of the current ordinance. Well, so we don't have an ordinance yet. We've got to figure it out. We then have to introduce it, and it's then another 2 weeks before we can adopt it. So we've just kicked the can down the road because certain individuals didn't want to put forth the effort to try to, resolve this in a timely manner. The variance just, I thought, was a bad move, and I even voted against what we did. What council ended up doing was supporting the permit issued by the permit office. Well, hell, it was a legal permit. There was no need for us to support it. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of redundant. But
Sure.
no matter, that's what the council did. I think the parish attorney at that meeting made it very clear that there were problems within our ordinance, and that him being ADA, given our ordinance and what could possibly be the violations, would probably have a problem moving forward, with with the prosecution, or issuing a bill, or what your true bill, whatever you need to do to move forward. Excuse me. So, you know, if I'm sitting in the audience and I've got that permit, it tells me, quite frankly, that I probably, I'm not saying that law enforcement's not going to come see me, but the end result of it is probably going to be to my favor.
Sure.
So the only thing I wanted to be clear when the vote was taken is, and I made the statement, I said, we're not giving you a get out of jail free card. We have no control over what the sheriff chooses to enforce, or how he chooses to enforce it, or what the district attorney does. I said, we write the laws. That's it. And I just wanted to I didn't want anybody to be confused when they left that meeting, that there had been some waiver of the law, or, so anyway, that's kind of what happened that night. And we're going to have ordinance committee meeting Tuesday night. Hopefully John will show up with some ideas of how he wants to fix this. I have some ideas in mind, and we'll discuss them at that point in time and try to figure out, the best, avenue to move forward.
Sure. And, the original ordinance was passed, we already said in 2007, but the interesting thing about it was it included things like fortune tellers and CBD shops, as well as this. And obviously, at some point, I'm not entirely sure when, CBD shops were removed because they're clearly out there.
Right.
So, this ordinance, this would not be sort of, I guess you could say, off the reservation to amend this ordinance to focus on something like that. And, it would seem from what the council said that they are in support of a venture like this, because this is more about commerce than it is about, I guess you can say, lewd activity, which is what the ordinance was initially trying to curb.
Yeah, well, let's look at a adult novelty shop, and they sell, they sell particular items. They sell a vibrator at Walmart that you can use on your back. You can do other things with that deal. It's just the part of the ordinance that stops them is it says, similar to human anatomy parts. So there's nothing they're going to sell you can't buy online. There's nothing that they sell that you can't, go buy some form or fashion of it, at your local Walmart store. So in essence, it's you talk about victimless crimes, and when you talk about who does it hurt, some of those things, there is some thought process that government sometimes meddles too much in, trying to dictate, what people's morality ought to be to a certain extent. What happens between two consenting adults is their business, in the privacy of their bedroom. So consequently, for local government to sit there and say, you can't have these type items bought locally, but you could order them from Amazon or anywhere else, seems to be, or drive to Port Allen, drive to Baton Rouge, seems to be kind of ludicrous. So, that's what I think the council's looking at. Look, there needs to be some protections.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be, if we had zoning, typically if you've got a zoning situation, then if you've ever noticed, they all, strip clubs, those type things, all seem to be grouped together, and they seem to be like in industrial areas, away from where people live. So
it's funny how that works.
It's how that works. But in essence, you could accomplish a similar thing. We have a distance requirement on alcohol. We could easily say, if you have this type of retail establishment that sells these items, which we've tried to outlaw in the old ordinance, we just identify them now because based on what Supreme Court rulings are, we know we can't say they're illegal.
Mm-hmm.
So we just identify them and then say, look, you got to be 1,000 foot from a church, playground, school, strip clubs, Hell, we could say, to operate that type of facility, instead of outlawing it, you could say to operate that type of facility, you need to be a mile from a residential rooftop. And you might say that's extreme. But if you go look at the state video poker law, to get a new video poker license, You got to go find a piece of property and draw a circle, and there's no rooftop within a radius, mile, 5 miles, whatever it is. Go try to find that piece of property in the state of Louisiana where there's a significant number of rooftops outside that area that will support it. So we already know that something exists within state law that allows for distance restrictions on certain, activities. So for the council to identify the activities that we have said are illegal, we could just take those same activities, identify them, and say, this is how far you got to be from a residential rooftop. This is how far you got to be from a church. This is how far you got to be from a school. And then you just make, you can have some laws with respect to signage, that, signs need to be block letters without any suggestive, material in them. So far as retail establishments, you could say that the windows have to be, none of the products in there have to be visible from the street, or the sidewalk or whatever. And there are some things that you could put in there that would protect the sensibilities of individuals who might not necessarily want to see that, yet not restrict commerce. And I think that's how the council needs to look at that and move forward is quit trying to regulate morality, but to put forth some laws that kind of restrict or place where these these businesses and these activities can take place, and try to keep them away where younger adults might be, and so that we kind of shield them from that situation.
Right. So you and I are going to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk about zoning because you already brought it up. But I want to clarify something real quick, and it may not be real quick because I know you have some strong feelings about it, as do most of the guys on the council, because a lot of y'all ran on the idea of no waivers, no variance, unless it made sense or it was temporary. Because I got a lot of questions after the most recent meeting. Well, they've given variances to certain people because of, y'all would allow a power pole and a trailer if they're building a house on that lot. Well, what I would tell them is it's temporary. They're doing that to build that house. So talk to us a little bit about variances and, waivers and why y'all are trying to avoid them, and kind of, especially in a situation like this, what kind of time you've costed the people who are trying to open the business.
Okay, so yeah, when I first, I've said it before, I'll say it again. When I first was elected, I thought the law was pretty black and white. You know what I'm saying? It was just, the world was black and white. I've been in office, no time. And a lady from Watson came to speak to me. She had a house, had some property associated with it. It was on a private servitude. They had exceeded the number of lots on that private servitude already. She and her husband were up in years. They wanted to get rid of some property that they were struggling to maintain, but they couldn't subdivide it. They couldn't sell it, so they were going to be required to sell their home because they were unable to keep up with the property associated with it. And so when I thought about her situation, I understand how the minor resub ordinance, why it exists. I understand why it exists. In that particular situation, though, it was restricting somebody from selling something that they couldn't maintain, and was going to force them, if we didn't grant a waiver, to subdivide that piece of property away from their house and sell it to somebody else. We were going to force an elderly couple to sell their home. And so it just made sense to me to grant that waiver. Look, laws are not perfect. They never are. Man, you can think about everything when you write ordinance, and there's somebody that's spending more time thinking about it than you are trying to figure out how to get a loophole through it. And so consequently, we write ordinances to eliminate certain actions, and then people that are innocent by their actions end up getting negatively impacted. And so I think that's when waivers are appropriate. This was a situation that The minor resub ordinance exists so we don't create many trailer parks or many subdivisions without any infrastructure improvements. That was the original intent. That's how all land is subdivided in the parish. You want to give your daughter an acre, you want to sell a lot to your cousin, all that is governed by that. However, we're looking at this situation in Watson that because of the fact that we had exceeded by ordinance the number of lots on a private servitude, she was stuck if we don't grant her a waiver. And so, yeah, I guarantee I hadn't been in office 2 months and I'm up there saying, well, we need to grant this waiver and this is why, and it makes sense. And I've heard thousands of stories. Some of them make perfectly good sense. Some of them like, no, that's not. And I know there are people that think that we shouldn't do that, but when somebody comes to you with a problem, and it's some law that you've helped draft or you have the ability to correct, and then you say, I can fix your problem, but I'm going to open 50 other doors that we don't want to open, then let me grant you a waiver. That's kind of how that was. This situation with Frenzies this is something that we need to fix by ordinance. This is something that we have an antiquated ordinance. It's a problem. We need to fix it. And to grant a waiver in that situation was a shortcut. To grant a variance was just a lazy man shortcut. And so that's why the council didn't grant the variance. But because we didn't do a little bit of work ahead of time, we're going to draw this thing out at least 2 more weeks. And who knows, next Tuesday night when we all sit at the ordinance committee meeting, there might be 4 or 5 different opinions about how to handle this, and we could draw it out, 2 more weeks. Who knows? But I know that there was an opportunity to handle this last Thursday and next Thursday, and we let it pass. And so these individuals if they open, are going to open in violation of our ordinance. However, with the knowledge that our ordinance is probably too broad and not defensible by the district attorney in the parish in a court of law. So, they got to decide what they want to do. The sheriff will have to decide what he wants to do. The district attorney have to decide what they want to do. In the meantime, the council's going to try to take this up and try to resolve it as rapidly as possible.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time, sir, to talk to us about that. We are going to take a short break. And then he and I are going to come back and talk a little bit about zoning, which he brought up earlier. We did have a conversation with Mr. Tracy Girlinghouse on Sunday, so we'll be citing some of that. So again, sir, appreciate you joining us. If you give us a little outro, please.
Right, always glad to be here. Always glad to try to, inform people of what's going on. And if they would come to council meetings, they'd see, firsthand how government works in Livingston Parish.
And it's tons of fun, let me tell you. Again, Mr. Garry Frog Talbert, councilman from District 2. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us for this one. Hope you'll come back for the next one. We'll be talking about zoning. Please remember the news is on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. Once a week in print on Thursdays at $7 a month to get that in your mailbox. We are online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll check you next time.